Imagine disappearing on an island that shouldn't exist, a place that surfaces in the ocean only to swallow those who cross its path. Lucas Sandoval, an experienced naval engineer, set out on what was supposed to be a routine trip in March 2010. He was the type of person who relied on logic, science, and his own skills to navigate the sea. But none of that prepared him for what lay ahead. Lucas was about to face the inexplicable. What should have been a casual day of exploration in calm waters turned into the beginning of a mystery that would change his life forever. After disappearing in the middle of the ocean, Lucas was presumed dead. His wife, Anna, waited months for news, but the silence of the sea seemed to be the only answer. Then 12 years later, Lucas reappeared, alone, confused, and with a story that no one could believe. But what happened during all that time? What secrets did that phantom island hide? Lucas's return brought questions as disturbing as his disappearance. He came back without having aged a single day, carrying one clear memory, a puzzling vision that challenged everything we know about the world. This story raises a question that no one wants to confront. What if there are places on our planet that should never be discovered? Prepare to uncover every detail of this incredible case. Stay until the end to understand the mystery of this ghost island that seems to defy time itself. Lucas Sandoval survived to tell his story, but how many others never returned? The story of Lucas Sandoval begins in São Luís, Maranhão, a city where the sea was more than just a horizon. It was an essential part of life. At 39 years old, Lucas had a special connection with the ocean. Since childhood, he believed that the sea had a personality of its own, sometimes welcoming, other times unforgiving. This almost spiritual relationship with the waters shaped his career and fueled his relentless curiosity for unexplored places. On March 5, 2010, Lucas was on a routine work trip. He had been hired to assess the damage caused by a storm on a grounded ship off the coast of Maranhão. After several intense days at the site, he decided to take advantage of a rare moment of free time to do something he loved: sailing alone. "I'm going to explore the nearby islands and will be back before dark," he casually told his colleagues. This was a common practice for Lucas, who always saw the sea as a refuge to disconnect from the world and find peace. Before departing, he sent a quick message to his wife, Anna: "I'm leaving now. I'll take a look at the nearby islands. I promise I'll be back for dinner. Love you." This would be their last communication for 12 long years. Lucas set out in a rented boat, with his GPS and radio working perfectly. The day was clear, the sea calm, and he carefully plotted his route. The initial destination was a small, uninhabited island known to local fishermen. However, as he approached, Lucas spotted something on the horizon that caught his attention: a rocky formation that wasn't on any maps. With his curious mind, Lucas didn't think twice before altering his course to investigate. As he drew nearer, the formation became clearer. It was an island, shrouded in a thin mist that seemed to pulse as if it had a life of its own. Lucas's GPS began displaying incoherent coordinates, and the radio fell silent, emitting only a low, constant static. He tried adjusting the equipment, but nothing seemed to work. Strange, he thought. Must be interference. When he finally reached the island, something inside him warned that this was no ordinary place. The beach was made of a grayish, grainy sand, unlike any he had ever seen. Dark, twisted trees formed a dense forest, as if they were natural sculptures carved by time. In the air, a penetrating metallic smell overwhelmed his senses. Lucas disembarked, driven by a mix of curiosity and unease. He knew something was off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Looking around, he noticed the silence was absolute, devoid of the sound of waves or birdsong. It was as if time itself had stopped on this island. What Lucas didn't know was that he had just entered a territory that no one should cross, a place that seemed to exist outside the reality as we know it. As he stepped onto the mysterious island, a chill ran down his spine. He scanned his surroundings but saw no signs of life, no blooming plants, no footprints aside from his own, not even the whisper of the wind. Everything felt eerily still, as if the very environment was waiting for something to happen. But Lucas was not a man to back down in the face of the unknown. He decided to explore. After all, this could just be an unusual island, and his rational mind sought a logical explanation. Advancing a few meters along the beach, Lucas noticed something that piqued his interest: wreckage. First, small pieces of weathered wood. Then, further ahead, a nearly destroyed vessel, covered in a vibrant red moss that seemed to faintly glow under the sunlight. The boat was overturned, its hull partially buried in the sand. He approached, crouched down, and noticed something strange. The material appeared corroded, as if it had aged hundreds of years in mere moments. Intrigued, Lucas decided to venture into the forest. The sense of discomfort grew with each step. The trees, with their twisted and disproportionate shapes, cast shadows that seemed to move. He felt as if he were being watched, though he could see no one. The temperature fluctuated constantly, with spikes of heat and cold, as if the place had its own climatic rules. Suddenly he heard a sound. It was low, almost imperceptible, like a murmur coming from the depths of the forest. Lucas stopped and looked around, trying to pinpoint the source. But the sound vanished as quickly as it had begun. My mind is playing tricks on me, he thought. Yet deep down he knew he wasn't imagining things. As he ventured further, he stumbled upon something even more unsettling. A small clearing with objects scattered on the ground. There was a broken wristwatch, an old compass, and what appeared to be a diary, completely deteriorated by time. He picked up the diary and tried to open it, but the pages were stuck together and illegible. Still, it raised a chilling question: who had been there before him? And what had happened to those people? Suddenly, something moved at the edge of his vision. He spun around quickly but saw nothing but the still trees. Lucas decided it was time to head back to the boat. His survival instinct was screaming, begging him not to stay there any longer. However, upon reaching the beach, he realized something was terribly wrong. The boat had vanished. The shore where he had landed was now empty, except for his own footprints in the sand. He ran to the water's edge, but there were no signs of his vessel. No wreckage, no waves that might have taken it away. It was as if the boat had never been there. Desperate, Lucas began to shout, calling for help, but only the infinite silence of the island responded. He was alone, trapped in a place that defied everything he knew. Not knowing what to do, he gazed at the horizon, where the thick fog seemed to be creeping closer, surrounding the island like a veil that separated this place from the rest of the world. Lucas felt a weight in his chest, a cold certainty he didn't want to accept. He wasn't just lost. He had crossed into something beyond what we know as reality. With the realization that he was trapped on the island, Lucas understood that the only way forward was to explore and try to comprehend what had happened. His mind still struggled to rationalize the situation. Perhaps the boat had been taken by the tide, or maybe he had landed at a different point and lost his bearings. However, as he searched the beach again, a disturbing discovery made any sense of logic begin to unravel. Near where he believed he had left the boat, Lucas found something buried in the sand, a corroded metal plate with an almost illegible inscription. He wiped the surface with his hands, and the words that emerged made his heart race. USS Concord, 1942. This was an identification of an American ship from World War II, missing for decades. How had it ended up there? And what did it mean to find a piece of that ship on an island that didn't appear on any maps? Lucas tried not to panic, but he knew something was deeply wrong with that place. Determined to leave the beach, he decided to explore the island's interior again, despite the growing discomfort he felt as he entered the forest. The metallic smell in the air seemed stronger, and the sunlight filtering through the trees created unsettling patterns on the ground. Lucas felt as if every step he took was being watched by invisible eyes. After walking for about half an hour, he stumbled upon a structure that seemed completely out of place. A small wooden cabin, partially overtaken by vegetation. The building looked old but still stood as if someone had lived there long ago. Approaching cautiously, Lucas pushed the door, which creaked in protest. The interior of the cabin was simple, but what he found inside was even more disconcerting. A table was covered with objects that appeared to belong to different eras. An oil lantern, a modern compass, and a map that seemed to be hand-drawn. On the map, there were confusing markings, lines that made no sense, and a central drawing resembling a vortex or spiral. Lucas tried to decipher it, but the more he looked, the more confused he became. On the table, there was something even more mysterious. A series of small wooden figures carved into shapes of humans and animals. However, one of these figures caught his attention. It was a perfect replica of a boat similar to the one he had rented. Lucas felt his stomach churn. Who could have made that? And how did they know about the boat he was using? While examining the items, he heard a noise coming from outside. Footsteps, light but distinct. He rushed to the door and looked into the forest but saw no one. However, the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. Lucas knew he needed to find an explanation. But with each discovery, the island seemed to plunge him deeper into a mystery that was beyond his understanding. He decided to head back to the beach and try to construct some sort of distress signal, but deep down, something told him that the island wouldn't let him leave so easily. Back at the beach, Lucas began organizing himself for survival. Despite the rising panic, he knew he needed to stay calm. His training as a naval engineer and his fishing experience could help him find a way to hold out until he was rescued. or until he figured out how to escape that island. His first priority was to find water. Walking along the shore, he noticed small streams of fresh water flowing toward the sea, but the liquid had a reddish tint and a metallic smell, similar to the moss covering the island. With no alternatives, he decided to filter the water using pieces of fabric he had found in the cabin. It was rudimentary but enough to prevent dehydration. The search for food, however, was even more complicated. Lucas tried fishing with his hands and even improvised a fishing rod using a branch and a line he had taken from the cabin, but the fish seemed to simply be non-existent. Even when exploring deeper into the forest, he only found a few strange fruits that appeared to be a mix of unusual colors and textures. Though reluctant, he decided to eat one of these fruits. The taste was bitter, but it kept him nourished, at least temporarily. While building a makeshift shelter with logs and leaves near the beach, Lucas noticed something that made him uneasy. In the distance, the fog surrounding the island seemed to be moving as if it were alive. At night, while trying to sleep, he was awakened by distant sounds that resembled muffled screams or moans coming from the sea. He couldn't pinpoint where they were coming from, but he felt a chill each time they echoed. Days turned into weeks, and Lucas began to notice something strange about the passage of time. The sun seemed to rise and set more quickly than he was used to. Sometimes he woke up feeling like he had only slept for minutes, yet the sky was already dark again. At other times, the days felt like they lasted for endless hours. He started to question his sanity. Was solitude playing tricks on his mind, or was something on the island truly distorting the flow of time? One night, while tending to a fire made of branches and red moss, Lucas had a clear sensation of being watched. He turned quickly and for a moment, saw a tall, thin figure at the edge of the forest, illuminated by the firelight. He screamed, but the figure vanished in an instant. He rushed over to the spot, but found no signs of footprints or any evidence that something or someone had been there. Desperate to understand what was happening, Lucas decided to explore deeper into the island. He needed answers even if it meant taking greater risks. As he re-entered the forest, he began to notice that the trees seemed denser and darker, and the ambient sounds grew more muffled. The air felt heavy, and the metallic scent seemed stronger than ever. Lucas didn't know what he would find, but he felt that the heart of this place held something. Something that might explain not only his situation but also the secrets the island had hidden for centuries. His journey was just beginning, and he knew the answers he sought could be more disturbing than he could imagine. As he traversed the thick forest, Lucas felt he was getting closer to something significant. The vegetation seemed to close in around him, forming a natural tunnel where light barely penetrated. He didn't know exactly what he was searching for, but something in the air, a low, almost imperceptible hum, seemed to guide him in a specific direction. Each step came with a sensation of weight, as if gravity itself were shifting. Finally, he arrived at a circular clearing in the heart of the forest. In the center stood a formation of stones arranged in a pattern that seemed unnatural. The stones were covered with the same red moss he had found on the beach, but as he approached, he noticed that the moss appeared to pulse as if it were alive. In the center of the circle, a bluish light emanated from a fissure in the ground, a light that seemed to warp the space around it, making it difficult to look directly at it. Lucas hesitated. He wanted to run, to flee from that place, but something stronger compelled him to move closer. He approached the light, feeling a strange mix of fear and fascination. When he was just a few meters from the fissure, he felt a wave of heat sweep through his body, followed by a high-pitched sound that seemed to come from within his mind. He fell to his knees, clutching his head as images began to invade his thoughts. They were visions, fragments of moments he did not recognize. Ancient ships sailing through stormy seas, planes disappearing into dense clouds, and human figures walking through forests similar to this one. But the most disturbing was a recurring figure, a tall, slender being with bright eyes and indistinct features, who seemed to observe each of these scenes. Lucas felt that this presence was not just a memory, it was something that was there with him in that very moment. Suddenly, the bluish light intensified, engulfing the entire circle of stones in a blinding glow. Lucas tried to back away, but he felt an invisible force pulling him toward the center. It was as if the island were alive, trying to absorb him into itself. He screamed, struggling against the force, but his feet began to slide toward the fissure. Then he saw something that made him stop fighting for a moment. Inside the light, he could see faces. They were the same faces he had seen in the wreckage and objects scattered across the island. Men and women from different eras, all trapped in an endless flow of movement, as if suspended in time. They did not seem aware, but they were also not entirely absent. With one last effort, Lucas managed to grab hold of one of the stones around the circle and pull his body away from the light's reach. The force pulling him ceased suddenly, and the blue glow began to fade. He lay on the ground, gasping for breath, as the buzzing sound disappeared and the environment around him returned to absolute silence. Lucas knew he had touched something he shouldn't have. He couldn't explain what he had seen, but one thing was clear: the island was not just a physical place. It was an anomaly, a portal, or a mechanism that defied all laws of nature. He needed to get out of there, but he knew that would be more difficult than he had imagined. And what he didn't know was that the island had yet to reveal all its secrets. After escaping the blue light emanating from the fissure, Lucas knew he couldn't stay on the island any longer. His strength was almost depleted, and each new mystery seemed to pull him deeper into an abyss of despair. He needed to find a way out before the island consumed what little sanity he had left. Returning to the beach, Lucas noticed that the fog surrounding the island seemed to be moving again. It pulsed, expanding and receding like a wave, but now it felt closer, as if it were slowly encircling the island. He knew that this was not natural, but he also knew that the only way to escape was to confront the unknown. Lucas began to gather anything that could help him improvise a boat. He used fallen trunks, pieces of wood he found in the wreckage, and tied everything together with vines he pulled from the trees. It wasn't the most reliable boat, but it would be his last chance to leave that place. He also collected some fruits and filtered water to survive the crossing, although deep down he knew there were no guarantees of success. As he pushed the makeshift raft into the sea, the fog began to close in on the horizon ahead of him. The metallic smell filled the air again, and he felt the temperature drop suddenly. His paddling was slow and heavy, as if the water around him were denser. With every stroke, Lucas felt as if something was watching him, an invisible presence that seemed to accompany him in silence. Suddenly, a familiar sound cut through the silence: the motor of a boat. Lucas stopped paddling and looked around, but saw nothing beyond the thick fog. He shouted for help, but his voice seemed to vanish into the air. Then, in the distance, he saw a glow, lights that seemed to be coming from a lighthouse. He paddled with all his strength toward the light, but the closer he got, the more it seemed to pull away. Exhausted, Lucas collapsed onto the raft, unable to continue. He felt as if the island had won, that he would never escape that place. But before he could lose consciousness, he heard another sound, this time closer. They were voices. He opened his eyes and saw a large vessel emerging from the fog. It was a Coast Guard patrol. The men pulled him on board, surprised to find him in such a deplorable state. Lucas tried to speak, but his voice was barely a whisper. When he finally managed to say something, all he could utter was, "The island? It's alive?" Upon arriving on the mainland, Lucas was taken to a hospital. There, he discovered something that left him speechless. For him, only a few weeks had passed since he set off on his journey, but for the outside world, 12 years had gone by. His wife, Anna, was still alive, but she had accepted his death years ago and had even tried to move on. Their reunion was emotional, yet filled with questions that no one could answer. Lucas was physically intact, showing no signs of aging, and none of the doctors could explain what had happened. His story was met with skepticism, but Lucas knew what he had lived through. Even so, he carried a doubt he could never answer. Why did the island let him go while so many others seemed to remain trapped forever? And what was the island really? A portal, a parallel dimension, or something beyond human comprehension? Lucas had survived, but he knew a part of him had never left that place. The years following Lucas's return were marked by a blend of relief and torment. He was home again beside his wife, but the memories of the island never left him. Sometimes, he would wake in the middle of the night, the sound of the pulsing mist still echoing in his mind. Other times, he would see the blue light in his dreams calling him back. He understood that he had escaped, but something about that island seemed to have left a permanent mark on his soul. His story quickly attracted media attention and intrigued researchers. While some people believed him, others dismissed him as just another fanciful storyteller. Scientists attempted to find explanations for what he had experienced, exploring theories about dimensional portals, temporal anomalies, and even psychological phenomena triggered by extreme isolation. But no answer ever seemed satisfactory. Lucas avoided discussing what he had seen at the heart of the forest. He knew that even among those who believed him, it would sound too incredible. Yet the vision of those faces trapped in the blue light, people from different eras, all seemingly captured by the island, haunted him. He wondered, were they still there? And why was he the only one to escape? Although he tried to move on with his life, Lucas began dedicating his days to researching mysterious disappearances in remote islands. He found accounts that dated back centuries, stories of sailors who claimed to have seen islands vanish on the horizon or ships that never returned. All these tales seem to converge on one idea: there are places in the world that do not adhere to the rules of reality as we know it. Despite his efforts, Lucas never managed to pinpoint the exact location of the island. His maps and coordinates were useless, as if the place had erased itself from existence after his departure. However, he always felt that the island was still there, waiting for its next victim. Before concluding his story, Lucas left a thought that resonated with all who listened. We think we know the world, but there are secrets that the planet guards so carefully that they challenge everything we believe to be true. The island is not just a physical place, it is something more. Perhaps it is a test, a trap, or something we were never meant to find. I survived, but I know that many others were not so fortunate. Lucas remained a living mystery, a survivor of a place that seemed to defy the very laws of time and space. His journey left a haunting question for everyone who heard his story. What if there are places that humans should never explore? And what about you? Do you believe that islands like this really exist? Could there still be people missing, trapped in places like that, waiting for a chance to escape? Share your thoughts in the comments and pass this story along to anyone you think needs to know about this mystery. Lucas survived to tell his tale, but the island remains hidden, silent, and perhaps waiting until the next mystery.